Hey there, Colts fans. This is Nathan Brown, your Colts insider with the Indianapolis Star, here with coworker Joel A. Erickson as we break down what has taken place for the Colts through the first 4+ days of NFL free agency and the legal tampering period. Big news to break down this week, of course, is the re-signing officially of star wide receiver Alec Pierce, starting quarterback Daniel Jones. We got a chance to speak with both of them this week as well, but I think some of the bigger news maybe is even to take a look at what moves the Colts have made, what players that they have let walk away from this team, what players they have traded away, and just where this team stands. Again, there will be more moves. I know there's some panicking out there that this is going to be the roster minus the draft that the Colts take into training camp here in a couple months. There will be some more moves. There will be some more guys to sign. But certainly most, if not all, of the big names have gone off the board, specifically in those defensive positions. So there are some question marks as to where the Colts front office moves forward and how they try to get notably better than they were last year, knowing that that was a bit of a pinch point and part of the reason that team fell apart down the closing stretch. But to break it all down, of course, got Joel A. Erickson here. I'll start, Joel, with this. We mentioned Alec and Daniel. Outside those two moves, re-signing those guys to major deals, what do you feel like is the biggest move either that the Colts made in signing someone, in trading someone, or move that they maybe didn't make or weren't able to make this week?
It's Trey Hendrickson. They were in line for Trey Hendrickson. They were part of that negotiation. I think they might have thought that they were getting him, and they didn't get him. And the Rams have had some. They're not the Rams. The Ravens. The Ravens did some stuff. I know what they've said. I know. It's too neat. I think. I think it's too neat to be like, oh yeah, we were totally gonna sign Trey Hendrickson and Max Crosby, and then all of a sudden, we just had him in for the physical, and but the Ravens also were willing to go to a spot they weren't. And I think this is maybe we'll just start with the hard question off the top, and I don't have a good answer for this, but the thing I've been trying to figure out all week is once you decide you have a player like where you need to have a player. Once you decide you need to have a player, like the Colts badly need a starting defensive end. They very, very, very badly need a starting defensive end. It is a glaring, awful weakness that it's not likely to be filled in the draft. In terms of like a starter right away. So, at what point, if you know you need a player that badly, do you just pay whatever they want? Because this kind of came into play with Jones too, where they decided Daniel Jones was their quarterback. They had to transition tag him. They ended up signing him to a deal that's essentially the Colts believe it's essentially just the next two tags. If you tag him in with the transition this year and then the franchise next year, that's what you would pay him anyway.
Yeah, it's like, isn't it like $5 million more than that? So it's basically they did the math on that and worked out what that would have been.
Yeah, I think that could go up next year if another quarterback signs a deal or something. I don't know who's out, but yeah, that's essentially that's the question that I don't have a good answer to. Is at what point does the monetary value not matter because you need the player so badly? That's the hard part, and I think that's the kind of thing that the Colts have been wrestling with all week.
Yeah, we saw that deal come out for Trey Hendrickson. Of course, it was, in the wee hours of, was it Wednesday morning? Days are kind of blending together with me. Wednesday morning, I believe, that deal was, correct me if I'm wrong, 4 years, $28 million average annual value, I believe, somewhere in that ballpark. It's a lot of money to pay to a guy who not only is 31, only was able to play 7 games last year because he's coming off a core muscle injury that required surgery. Still an incredibly impactful guy, or has shown to be when he's been on the field. He had 2 straight seasons of 17 and a half sacks in 2023 and 2024. Of course, we should note his defensive coordinator when he did that was Lou Anarumo, who's now with the Colts. His defensive line coach was Marion Hobby, who's now with the Colts. It seemed so much through this offseason, and I know that the Colts have a strong link to him even going back to last August. You can maybe talk more about that. That was obviously before I came on the beat, but they've had strong links to Trey Hendrickson for a while. That was almost like this worst kept secret. It kind of felt like whenever you read national lists or stories about free agency, about how much sense the Colts would make for Trey Hendrickson, and then he goes and the Bengals opt not to give him any sort of franchise or transition tag, kind of let him walk free, and he makes it clear that he's saying goodbye to Cincinnati a week and a half ago or so. But you still have to get the deal done, and when it comes down to decisions on whether you want to play in Baltimore, who has fairly consistently been in the playoffs and been in the mix with Lamar Jackson, although of course they weren't last year, and lost their head coach in John Harbaugh, or want to go to a team like the Colts, who haven't been to the playoffs at all in 5 years, still have some questions at quarterback and some questions about what their ceiling is. If you're Trey Hendrickson, I can understand why Baltimore feels like it's more of an attractive place to go to, and certainly if they're willing to pay you the most money, if that is the most important thing to you, which it felt like through a lot of this, that the holdout was him waiting to get the money that he felt like he deserved after Jalen Phillips signed for $30 million a year, and Danielle Hunter got a 1-year, $40 million extension right before free agency really got rolling. It seemed like most money was probably going to win out, and for whatever reason, no, I think I read somewhere, I don't know who to credit it to. It sounded like maybe the Colts were willing to go somewhere in the like $25 million a year range, and he obviously got a couple million more. I don't know, and I don't know if you do, if the Colts were willing to go the full 4 years that he got in Baltimore. That does seem like that is a little bit of a risk, but sometimes you have to take risks, and you have to know that you are getting a really good player for a year or two, and that year or two is really important, and you kind of have to bite a bullet a little bit on the back end and roll the dice.
Yeah, this is what I know about the Trey Hendrickson situation. A couple of years ago, the Colts were in the mix for Danielle Hunter, and actually, my understanding is that they actually offered him a little bit more than he actually got from Houston. But he's from Houston, and so for him, that going home outweighed whatever minor. It wasn't like a lot more. So like whatever monetary difference it was, he wanted to go home. He wanted to play with DeMeco Ryans at home. He wanted to be home in Houston. What I know about this is that this was not that. The Hendrickson deal was not that. This was not Hendrickson picking a similar offer. That the Ravens were willing to go somewhere to a point that the Colts were not willing to go to for Trey Hendrickson. I don't know if that's years. I don't know if that's dollars. I agree with you. It does seem like Hendrickson really cared about the monetary figure, and there's a piece of this too that I think gets lost sometimes. We try to remind people every year. It's not just about the bank account. I mean, it is about the bank account. It is about how much money. But like for these players, this is also what contract they sign for is essentially an estimate of their worth as players. And a lot of them treat it like that. They look at it as how much I get paid is a sign of what the league believes of me as a player, and so that's a part of it too. Now, obviously, the money helps, and you want as much money as possible. But part of the reason, if not just like I guess it's not just a financial thing. It's not just like Trey Hendrickson wants to buy another house in Florida or something, and so he has to have that money. It's more about I believe I'm one of the best pass rushers in the league. I should be paid like one of the best pass rushers in the league because that's what I am, and I want to be recognized as such. You can have issues with that too if you want, but that's some of what's going on there. This deal really made me start thinking about what the Trey Hendrickson thing really made me start thinking about what does it mean if you really need a player and how much you're willing to spend, because like the Colts felt last year that they really needed Sauce Gardner, and so they gave up 2 first-round picks. They really need a defensive end, like very, very, very badly. They signed Arden Key, they signed Michael Clemens. We can go through those guys kind of quickly, but neither of those guys are starters, is my understanding. And they were terrible without DeForest Buckner as a pass rush last year. They have to have that guy. Trey Hendrickson is supposed to be that guy. But like in a vacuum, if you said, do you want Trey Hendrickson at 4 years for up to $120 million, I think that deal's going to age poorly for them. I could be wrong. Sometimes pass rushers age better than other folks, but like I think that deal feels like there's a lot of risk involved in it for Baltimore, to me. Like if you look at Crosby versus Hendrickson, Crosby's 28. 28 versus 31 is an enormous difference.
Yeah, I mean, it's a full contract.
Yeah, and when the Colts have done that, in the past, like when they signed Justin Houston, it was a 2-year deal. It wasn't a 4-year deal. So some of the minimizing risk piece of it, I would feel like that I would not be comfortable. I think if they had signed him to a 4-year deal, I think they would have taken a lot of heat locally and maybe nationally too. But at the same time, they really need a pass rusher, and they don't have one. They really need a defensive end, and they don't have one. And they don't have a first-round pick to get one. So, yeah, there's a real – I don't know. Like I said, I don't know the answer. I think it's maybe dependent on you as a fan and what you want to do. Like, do you care about them pushing money into the future or having potential risk of a really bad contract in the future? Or do you think we just have to have this? Or do you care about if they're going to spend money, I want them to spend it wisely? It's kind of a difficult thing to look at.
It felt like a move that would have raised the Colts' ceiling for next year, maybe the next couple of years, but it is also one that if you are thinking in the back of your mind, there's still a chance that some of this stuff doesn't work out. It's also a move that makes it, it puts a lot of money on the books going forward that you might not want to have on there in 28 and 29. Although I think it was $60 million guaranteed. I don't know what those.
I still haven't seen structure on this thing.
Yeah. The reporting out there, I think, is like it was a $20 million signing bonus, $60 million guaranteed. We don't know how that money worked, what when the guarantees for the rest of the money, factored in. So it's hard to know exactly for sure if it was really kind of just a 2-year deal in terms of guaranteed money or how that was all going to shake out.
I can't give away too much because I have access to some of this stuff, but the salary stuff is coming out a little bit. It's kind of trickling this year for some reason. I don't know exactly why, but it is for not just me, but for everybody. So like some of the structure stuff has been a little bit difficult to get a handle on. If it was just 2 years and then you can cut him, the Colts don't like to do that. But in terms of the Colts wanting him, like of course they wanted him. We saw what Lou Anarumo cares so much about the guys he's coached before. They brought in Xavier Rhodes Xavier Howard. Wow, I just teleported back like 5 years. They brought in Xavier Howard, even though Xavier Howard was very clearly done. Pretty much just because Lou believed in him, And so.
And when they went looking for a linebacker,
Jermaine Pratt, Jermaine Pratt's another one. I guarantee they brought in Mike Hilton when Kenny Moore got hurt. Immediately went and got Mike Hilton. I guarantee they wanted Lou wanted Trey Hendrickson pretty badly. But like I said, this is where the rubber meets the road. Like at what point is it too much? At what point is it too much, and you're willing to roll the dice with the need because you don't feel like the investment is the right investment to make? That is probably, and I think I'm not trying to say this as like a defense of Chris Ballard. I'm just saying, like, in a vacuum, I think that's the hardest thing a general manager and owner probably has to do. Like, I think if I'm sitting in the seat of the Colts or the Packers or anybody, I'm kind of trying to figure out, wait, so we need this spot, but I don't think this guy should be paid as much as he's about to get. And I really don't think I have other options beyond that.
So what do I do? So here's a question for you. Obviously you've been around the NFL for a decade now, and we'll have a better sense both for this Colts team and this franchise and Chris Ballard and ownership, as well as just the market in general. Is there a chance where Chris Ballard or folks in the front office wanted to get close to or maybe even match this offer that the Ravens were willing to give him, but Carly Ursay-Gordon, team ownership in general, was maybe a little hesitant to do that, not knowing whether this brain trust would be around here for more than one more year and whether they might have to tear things down here soon, and having that contract on the books would make all of that a little bit prohibitive.
I think that what ownership's role in free agency is maybe the least understood, the least we have the least information on it. A lot of owners don't talk ever. Like, and Colts fans are used to hearing their owner do interviews and stuff like that, so I don't think this lands the same way. But very seriously, there are owners that do not speak to the media ever about any decision their team makes. And so it kind of makes it so that you don't have this great database of information to pull from on how they do stuff. Like, and then the other piece of it is ownership, like with the quarterback decision, right? The Colts have been all in on Daniel Jones all offseason. We've told you that. Everyone's told you that. Shane Steichen said it plainly. Chris Ballard said it plainly at the end of the season. They have been all in on Daniel Jones. And there are some people who disagree with that, who don't understand why that is, but they have been all in on Daniel Jones. And when people were floating, should the Colts go get Kyler Murray, like, the reason I didn't interact with all that much is because they'd already told us what they wanted to do was Daniel Jones. But there's also a piece of it that is ownership. And this is where it gets muddy. So I asked Carly Ursay-Gordon when she spoke last how she saw the quarterback position moving forward. She said, I'm going to leave the quarterback evaluating up to other people, right? Which is a very common ownership thing. But in that same press conference, she also said, I am bringing these guys back because of what I saw at the beginning of last season that looked encouraging. Well, Daniel Jones was a huge part of that. And he was the missing piece to the offense, was having a healthy Daniel Jones there. So her decision to bring them back, well, she's not actively evaluating the quarterback. What she's telling them is, at least what she's telling the public. I don't know what she's saying behind closed doors, but what she's telling the public is, I believe that what we had there is the reason they're back. And so if that's true, then you have to get Daniel Jones back. Kyler Murray doesn't come into the discussion because that's a completely different vision from what she said about what she wanted from this team coming back after last year. So there's the other piece of ownership stuff. Is it an active, you should go sign this player? That has happened with Jim Irsay in the past. Stop. I think he told Chris, maybe with Matt Ryan, stop worrying about the cost, just get the quarterback or something like that. Or you can have this sort of implied thing, which again, I don't know that this matters all that much because Shane Steichen really, really, truly believes in Daniel Jones. He really, really, truly believes Daniel Jones is the right quarterback. I want to emphasize that as much as possible. Shane Steichen doesn't care if you don't believe in him. It's totally, you're a fan. You can believe in whoever you want to believe in as a quarterback. Shane Steichen believes in Daniel Jones. Full stop. So they were going to get Daniel Jones back. But if there was any doubt, and again, I don't think there was any doubt. If there was any doubt, you're dealing with the implied part of we have to get this offense back. And as much as you think, well, you just plug in another quarterback and go, that's not how this works. And I'm going to bring up a couple of options. Like, the thing is, unfortunately, the Colts have lots of recent history. So Phillip Rivers, Daniel Jones, and I would say Gardner Minshew. And if you listen to this podcast, you know how much this hurts me because I did not like watching Gardner Minshew play football. But those three quarterbacks outperformed what most people expected of them in their season with the Colts. Okay, so you go, well, you just bring in another quarterback. Well, what about Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz, Jacoby Brissett? Like, all of those guys, Carson Wentz, I would say, played about what we thought he could be. Like, that's the best Carson Wentz could be, and it wasn't good enough. It ended up costing him a playoff spot at the end of the season. Matt Ryan was done. He was done as a player. Brissett, they thought there was more there, and they couldn't find it, and he's kind of been the same guy since then. So just bringing in a guy to a good situation with a coach who's gotten the most out of someone before doesn't mean you're going to get it again. I think Minnesota is a good example of this. Like, everyone right now is like, well, Kyler Murray went to Minnesota. It's going to work out. And it might. It worked with Sam Darnold. But we're just coming off of a season where he couldn't get his own drafted quarterback to play even remotely good football. So it's even with guys who have good reputations with quarterbacks or good offenses, it's not just plug and play. You don't know how it's going to work. The question with Jones is the Achilles tendon. But they know what it looked like when he was in there, and that's why it was there. So this is a lot of rambling on the quarterback situation. But like, that's the thing with ownership is we don't know how much of a say she has if it's like you can only go to this number for Trey Hendrickson. I don't know that for sure. And we also don't know like what's the implied or the overarching big picture that they might have been given, because that's the way some owners work. Because they say, this is the big picture. I want my team to look like this. You figure out how to do that. We don't know all that stuff.
Spending a lot of money on Trey Hendrickson certainly would have made it more difficult to go and improve some other positions. But when you look at some of the work they've done, it's not like they, when they missed out on Trey Hendrickson, they went and scooped up, one or two of the top 10 to 15 linebackers on the market. They've obviously traded away Zaire Franklin. We do not know if Jermaine Pratt is going to be back. It's probably a coin toss at best. From that standpoint, he's a free agent. Chris Ballard said that they needed to get younger and faster. Both of those guys were serviceable in certain ways. You can look at metrics, and there are ways to point to them being fairly solid in some phases of the game last year, but they also really struggled in pass coverage. And both of them are 29 years old. As Zaire Franklin said on the Jim Rome show earlier this week, you can't make me any younger. So we'll have to see what they do there. But that's the curious part about all of this.
He was one of the faster players on the defense.
He did. So you kind of have to take what he said there, I think, with a little bit of a grain of salt.
I'll let Colts fans decide if they think that was the case or not.
We haven't even gotten a chance to listen to his podcast yet this week. That was supposed to be my duty on Wednesday morning, and then the Trey Hendrickson stuff combined with Daniel Jones getting solidified gave us a busy Wednesday, and we had some interviews at the facility yesterday. Still have not gotten a chance to listen to that. We'll have to see what Zaire left in store for us there. But getting back to
a chance, by the way, is an interesting choice of words.
What did I say?
You said you get the chance to do it.
I mean, I told Nat Newell, who I know is listening to this at some point in the future, that I was going to do that. So I will do it at some point. I will readily admit I have not listened to a Zaire Franklin podcast before, so this will be a first for me, and I bet that it will be quite the experience.
Have to listen might be more of a the word that I would use.
Assigned to listen. Yeah, maybe that's the better way to phrase it.
Unless he wants to talk about what how Brewer spring training looks like, then I'll listen to it.
It's true. I do have to say, Miles Turner going and commenting on Zaire's Instagram post when he posted him in a Packers uniform was like almost too on the nose as two guys. Even just in his interview with Jim Rome earlier this week, like wasn't like scathing, but if you have heard Zaire talk and know that he doesn't pull a lot of punches, and he's got away with words, know exactly what he's saying all the time. You could read through the lines and find some stuff to, if you're a Colts fan, to be frustrated with. But we'll leave that there. I guess my back on free agency, when you look at this roster and where it is right now, I think there are some positions, and maybe this is a good way to transition. There are some people currently on the roster who either didn't play last year because they were stuck behind some players, or were in lots of cases injured, that you know a little bit more about than I do, and how they could maybe fit into the Colts roster in the future. Sometimes when you let some players walk, it is in part because you have guys behind them that not only are going to be cheaper, but you think either will be as good or will be close to as good, and them getting opportunities to develop on the field will make them better moving forward. There probably are some players like that, but I don't know that there are enough on the roster to say that this Colts roster is close to, especially on the defensive side, fully formed. Like you could, you have a handful of players between who you picked up in free agency or through trades, and some of your younger guys who had been depth pieces in the past. You have some guys who could take a step up and could, maybe have been starters earlier in their career, but maybe shouldn't have been, that you are trusting that you're going to develop. I think there are some folks on the linebacker positions or the safeties that maybe could step into bigger roles this year, but I still feel like this roster is missing a piece or two that you need to acquire, that has to be a veteran for you to be able to fully reach your potential. When you look at this roster, who are some guys that you think could step into bigger roles because of who we saw walk away, and that maybe just possibly that could actually be, I don't know that I want to say that was like the primary goal in all of free agency this week, but guys who potentially could see some bigger opportunities that could fit the bill once we hit training camp.
Well, they've been really high on Jalen Carlisle. That's the one at linebacker. Kind of everybody else, I think we're going to see some lower cost signings at linebacker here, just because basically everybody they had last year, well, I guess with the exception of Austin and GK, who did play defensively, especially earlier in the season, but almost the entire other rest of the roster is kind of special teams type guys. So that is a concern. I do think that's a position that you can fill in the draft and get instant impact in the second or third round. Like, one of the reasons I wanted them to sign a defensive end who could make an impact right away is because it gives them that second round pick to just draft a middle linebacker or a weak side linebacker and get a plug and play guy. Don't know if that's going to happen now. They need a trade for that to happen now. But Jalen Carlisle is a guy that they really, really like. He just has not been able to stay healthy. He's had a couple of really, really bad injuries. It's not so much bad; it's just lingering. He's had a couple surgeries. The biggest thing last year was he had one in the off season and didn't get a chance to learn the defense really on the field with the coaches, and so that when he finally came back, they didn't feel comfortable putting him in. But Carlies, the idea of Carlies, I think in the Colts' head is really good. That it's a converted safety who can really run, can be the coverage type of linebacker that they don't have. We've seen it in spurts, but he's got to stay healthy. Like he's kind of teetering on the edge of the Juju Brents, Paris Campbell territory, where at some point you just have to go. The injuries are just too much. If he's on the field, though, if he's healthy and on the field, he's an interesting piece. The other one I think that sticks out to me for that is safety, because corner, we can get into this here in a second. The Colts actually have a lot of corners. So Justin Wally coming back, I think is big, but I also think that like they could weather a loss there just because they have a lot of dudes. Just, here you go. Charvarius Ward, Kenny Moore, Mekhi Blackman, Jonathan Edwards, Sauce Gardner, Jalen Jones, Justin Wally, all back. All those dudes are back. That's I think I said 7. That's a full depth chart right there. Safety, though, on the other hand, is the opposite. The 1,111 defensive snaps signed with Washington. That's Nick Cross. I don't think in a vacuum that's that big of a loss because he struggled so much in coverage, but it does matter from the fact that there's a hole in the starting lineup there. And then 150 snaps from Rodney Thomas in the 3 safety packages. He didn't play a ton, but he played in 3 safety packages. Is also gone. So you're essentially with a giant hole there. Hunter Wohler, last year's 7th round pick, looked great in camp last year and was headed to play probably in the 250, 300 snap-ish range if everyone was healthy last year as the dime linebacker and also playing some safety. Maybe he's a strong safety for you. Maybe. But I also think that they kind of like him more as a versatile piece that they can move around the defense. And if that's true, then you need a safety. I do think that Lou Anarumo probably wants somebody who's less of the in-the-box strong safety and wants someone who can do both, because I know he wants to get Cameron Bynum in a couple of other spots, like get him some more nickel, use him more as a versatile chess piece. The other guy that I don't know much about because he wasn't here in training camp and he didn't play at all once they got him. They claimed Ruben Lowry off waivers from the Ravens, and then they kept him on the roster all season. And so that indicates that there's some interest in what he could develop into as a safety. I don't know. I really don't know anything about him. I don't cover the Ravens, so I didn't see him play in the preseason. But you don't make a waiver claim and then hold on to a guy while he's not playing all season long for no reason. There's something they like about Ruben Lowry as a player. Again, I don't think that means he's a starter next year, but they like him as maybe a depth piece. Maybe he takes over maybe he steps into Rodney Thomas's place, on the roster. They still need 2. I think that's maybe an underrated part of this is that, coming into free agency with Cross, it was will they, won't they? And we didn't talk a lot about what happens if won't they. Well, the answer is they don't have a strong safety, at least as far as we know right now. I have some inklings of what you might do, but yeah, safety has become a need that's the strong safety has become a need that's really on par with defensive end and linebacker. Like they need one.
What when you talk about their abundance of corners, again, not necessarily all of them guys who you'd want to be in your starting lineup, but they have some good depth there. I know Justin Wally, as a rookie last year in training camp, really showed out. If you have a healthy Sauce Gardner, a healthy Charvarius Ward, and a healthy Justin Wally coming into the season, how could you envision getting Wally a little bit more involved on the field if you feel like he's a guy who just has to be out there, but you've also got 2 All-Pros ahead of him on the depth chart? Is there a way where you could reconfigure this secondary between your corners and your couple safety spots where he could factor into all of this, or how could you envision that potentially shaking out? I know we got a long time and got a lot more players to add to this roster before we have a good picture.
Well, could Kenny Moore play safety? That's my real question. Kenny, obviously up there in years as a nickel. His season last year was better, at least according to Next Gen Stats and kind of everything that I've heard than I think most fans give him credit for. He's not really. He struggles at times with crossing routes and some other, breaking stuff now at this point in his career. But is that something you could do? Could Kenny Moore play more safety, give you some versatility in terms of both of your safeties at that point could play nickel or slide down into the slot if they needed to? Do you get him? I mean, Kenny's always been a ball hawk. If you get his eyes on the football all the time, do you think you can get more of that? We know he can do some of the run support stuff and the blitzing, especially the blitzing. He's always been a very good blitzer. So, is Kenny Moore a possibility at safety? Because you do have a couple of guys there at corner, specifically Wally and Mekhi Blackman, are both guys who have outside-inside versatility. And, if with Charvarius Ward deciding to come back, Mooney Ward is going to come back, do you roll the dice a little bit and go, I've got some guys on the outside. I've got Blackman and Jalen Jones, and I've got some guys that can step in if we need it instead of Gardner. If Gardner or Ward get hurt, do I just play Wally on the inside and just see what he can do there and make him my guy on the inside, and then move Kenny Moore to safety? That's the question I have. Just because you have some of those other corners, like I said, you have Jonathan Edwards sitting there as a player that I know they really, really like developmentally, and now he's got an off season to actually really kind of develop. Last year he played way more snaps than I think anybody, including him, expected or wanted him to play. But do you have a chance to really develop an undrafted guy that they think has the tools to be a pretty good corner? He played 313 snaps last year. That's way more than they thought.
Yeah, I mean that seems like, and then this is of course all predicated on guys staying healthy. But if you could have a lineup with Sauce and Mooney Ward at corner and Wally at nickel, Kenny Moore and Cam Bynum at safety, when you've got Hunter Wooler and Ruben Lowry there kind of in reserve rotational spots like that starts to feel like maybe you've got enough on your roster to plug holes. But that's also moving some guys around into positions that they haven't played before, or you're talking about guys staying healthy who either ended the season on IR, or guys who just missed an entire season with an injury when it comes to Wally and for the most case Wooler. So like there's some question marks there. That's a lot of rolling the dice, but I guess that would be a way, knowing that you don't have a first round pick and linebacker and defensive end are still such big holes on the roster, that maybe you could move the pieces on the chessboard around to kind of solve a position or two. We'll have to see if that's how things shake out. You will obviously have a chance to talk to Chris Ballard here in a couple weeks at the owners' meetings. We'll be very interested to see what he says about that, and we'll also pay attention over the next couple days to see what signings the Colts might make. Let's maybe transition to the defensive line. There's been a lot of shakeup there. Again, as we have said repeatedly on the episode today, not that top line starter defensive end sighting that I think we're expecting by Wednesday or so if we had started the week. But you have a couple players leaving that we know, and probably even maybe one or two more that we kind of are assuming will not be back. And you've also got, let's see, you got four new members of your defensive line. Colby Wooden, who came to Indianapolis in a trade with the Packers for Zaire Franklin. You have signed Arden Key, Michael Clemens, and then Derek Noddy. All three rotational guys who have gotten some starting experience in their previous stops, but I think in a best case scenario, certainly Indianapolis would not be looking at them to take on those roles. When I talk about those four, and then Samson Ebukam and Neville Gallimore signing elsewhere as free agents. Tyquan Lewis is a free agent who, when you look at who the Colts have signed, I would imagine is probably not going to be back because they have kind of filled his hole. When I mentioned those guys leaving and the new players the Colts have either traded for or signed, who intrigues you the most from that group?
Probably Colby Wooden. The Colts have this history under Chris Ballard of kind of identifying guys who maybe other teams haven't gotten as much out of, and then getting more out of them in their system. Kind of feels like maybe that's Colby. Colby Wooden was playing nose tackle in Green Bay. They just didn't really have a nose tackle, and he played it well. But that's not really what he was drafted to do. He was drafted as a 3-4 defensive end. When they switched to a 4-man front, they moved him inside. The Colts see him as kind of a 3 technique to 5 technique. 5 technique, for those of you who don't know, that's a 3-4 defensive end. They line up on the inside of the tackle shoulder. And those guys, like that's kind of what Neville Gallimore did last year. I think they probably think they see some penetration ability with Colby Wooden. Arden Key is interesting just because he's just a straight explosive rusher. He's not going to be a 15 sack guy or a 10 sack guy or something like that, but he's juice in rotational stuff, which they did not have at all last year. His get off time, the way he gets off the ball at the snap, would have been faster than literally anybody else on the Colts roster last year. So I think he's kind of a guy that you kind of expect to be, at the very least, a solid rotational pass rusher. I don't know what to think of the Michael Clemens signing.
I think there's a lot of things to think. I don't know. I don't know where he fits in. It certainly felt like it was a little bit larger deal.
He's Tyquan's spot. That's the thing.
Yes.
Football wise, he's Tyquan's spot, but there's a lot of projection there.
Mm-hmm. When you sign, and again, I know there are some holes in what fans think versus what actually makes football sense, or what is true inside the locker room. But it was very notable that Jets fans were wildly surprised that the Colts would be signing Michael Clemens on Wednesday like they did. And when you know what that Jets defense was last year, when you are signing someone that Jets fans are super happy for you to take off their hands, I don't know that that's the best sign in the world. Michael Clemens, I think he was signed to a 3-year deal, somewhere in the $6 to $7 million a year range. I think in terms of average annual value, I think when you look at the guaranteed money, and again, we don't, we're still waiting for some of this stuff to come in. Although, did you report the Michael Clemens structure? I know you had that for someone. I couldn't remember who it was. Yes,
I did.
that's
that
right.
one. It's a deal they can get out of after 1 year.
Yeah, it kind of felt like a 1-year deal and guaranteed money.
It looks bigger than it actually is. Yeah. A lot of his stuff for 2027 isn't guaranteed until the 5th day of the league year, which, like, you and I are recording this on Friday, March 13th. We're not even at the 5th day of the league year yet for 2026. So, like, if you think about when they would be making moves, if they want to get rid of Michael Clemens, they get out from under a lot of that money. Basically, they get out from almost all of the money that they would owe him next year if they just cut him before they make all these moves next year.
Yeah. I mean, purely from the standpoint of getting a little bit younger and maybe more explosive. I mean, he does that for you. He's 28 years old. He'll be 29.
Explosive in what way?
Yeah. I mean, explosive in give it, yelling the F word at fans in Cleveland. We do go to Cleveland this season. That will be we were.
I have already volunteered Nathan for the job of asking Michael Clemens about going back to Cleveland.
Yeah, that will be fun. For those of you who don't know what that reference is,
Go look it up.
go
Google
look
it.
it up. Literally, if you just type in
Michael
Michael
Clemens.
Clemens and make sure it's EAL.
Yeah.
I have already caught myself several. I mean, luckily caught myself before publishing, but caught myself several times spelling his name incorrectly. Um, Type in Michael Clemens, Cleveland Browns fans. I think December 28th, 2023, and that should lead you right to it. Um, yeah, I mean he's the type of guy that um, maybe yeah, you're kind of just rolling the dice. I think in a little bit. I think the biggest surprise, if Michael Clemens was signed today, on the third day of formal free agency, and the Colts already had that like starter level guy, I feel like he makes less of a buzz because it truly feels like you're um, just kind of signing a guy for a rotational standpoint. And this is not to say that I think that the Colts envision him as a starter next year, but it all hits a little bit different when you're signing guys on Wednesday, kind of like Derek Nottie, that are clearly going to be rotational guys in your system, but you don't have the starter yet on your roster. And we'll see again what that comes to. So you add him into the mix along with Colby Wooden, as you mentioned, on the interior. Derek Nottie, someone that I know that we don't necessarily think might even be on the week one roster next year.
Follow the money. He's getting paid nothing.
Yeah.
And he's veteran salary benefit, so he counts almost nothing against the cap.
Yeah, basically like a little bit over $1 million against the salary cap. And I know this has been mentioned too on social media. Like you that signing of him maybe doesn't look great on the first day of free agency, but when it comes down to it, like you have to go into camp with 90 guys on your roster. Not every single, I mean, only a little bit over half of the guys that you sign or you have rostered are going to be on your active roster when we get to week one football come mid-September. So, do we think he's a guy who is going to be on that roster? I'd say probably not. But he's an experienced veteran. He has gotten a lot of snaps. Although I don't know how effective he's been in those roles. You can make the argument for or against, but he's got experience. He fills a spot kind of in that interior group where you'll have some competition between, I've got Grover Stewart and DeForest Buckner, who are your unquestioned starters there. You've got Colby Wooden, you've got Adebaware, Derek Nottie's, probably slots in that like fifth or sixth spot with Tim Smith, just kind of fighting to make the roster if I were to wager a guess. But we will see how all that shakes out. But in the end, you've got to fill up your roster, and he kind of feels like a signing that does just that.
Yeah, it's that's part of it is the like a lot of times with these deals you have to look at the money. The money tells you what a player is what a team thinks a player is. And like I said, the veteran salary benefit thing for guys, Corey Ballantyne is a guy that they signed last free agency that we did an interview with, that we talked to, and we talked about what he could be in the defense, and he was gone like 2 weeks at a training camp. So some of it's like, and he was another one who was on I can't remember if he was veteran salary benefit or if he was just minimum, but he was around there. A veteran salary benefit, just real quick, is the player gets more money. He counts as essentially a second-year player on the cap. So it's cheap. Just think cheap. Very, very cheap.
Yeah. And I remember, I think you had it in your story, like the rough numbers are somewhere like he's paid just somewhere under 1.5 million, but only counts like a little bit over 1 million against the cap.
Right.
It's kind of one of those little known tools that teams have at their at their hands to.
It saves them like $400,000 of cap space, and again, it's cheap. So like if they cut him, he's gone, and it does not affect anything for next year. So that's a signing that just isn't a ton. Defensive end, that hole at defensive end is gaping, and really the hole at linebacker is gaping.
Yeah, I mean, you take a look at as I am right now. Like you take a look at the Colts depth chart. The Colts have 2 linebackers on their roster right now, Jalen Carlies and Austin Ajike. Again, I know it's the 3rd day of the league year. We've got lots of days, weeks, and months before we're playing football, before we even get to training camp. But that, since we've talked through some of the secondary stuff, like that feels like, because it's 2 players, like maybe the biggest, maybe even more so the biggest hole. I certainly don't think the Colts will go into the season with the 6 players that they have at defensive end on their depth chart right now, and be be cool with the way that looks. But they have some work to do, and it really, Sauce Gardner, if healthy, can make make a big impact on this team. But man, of all years to not have a first round pick, although it would have been in that, what is it, like the 15th or 16th pick, I think, potentially, depending on where some guys go, maybe even outside the range of getting one of the top edge rushers in the draft, because I know that position is really solid in this year's draft. The ability to have potentially signed or drafted a guy from there in the first round, and then maybe taken a linebacker in the second round, would have been big. But then you don't have Sauce Gardner on your team, so you can weigh what the best of both worlds is there. We'll have to see what they do. I know the most talked about option, before we transition away from the defense here, the most talked about option seemingly still left out there for the Colts at defensive end is trading with the Vikings for Grenard. I think he's certainly a former Pro Bowler. Can't remember if he's been All-Pro or not, but the Vikings made clear, I think it was Adam Schefter of ESPN who reported it last week first, that the Vikings were open to trading him. A lot of talk about him potentially being someone who they could slot in, and all of a sudden, even though he's not a free agent, you end up with a really solid piece in there. What is your feeling of whether that could be a realistic opportunity for the Colts, given what their draft capital is, and how important getting some young talent in this year's draft would be for them, and the holes that they currently have?
Yeah, Ballard's always been he's been opportunistic on trades. I shouldn't say always, but he has been opportunistic on trades this time of year. That's how DeForest Buckner got here. That's how Yannick Ngakoue got here. Obviously, that's how Colby Wooden got here. They traded Zaire Franklin. He's not afraid to do a player-for-player trade in the offseason, which isn't always the most I do think the draft compensation matters. If it's a 3rd rounder this year, I mean, maybe you do it, though, because this is here we go again. Like, I'm sure he wants that pick, but they need a defensive end. Gosh, do they need a defensive end?
Like, here's the thing. If you can go out and use your 2nd round pick to get a starting linebacker, essentially using your 3rd round pick to get a guy who is already established at that starting you're
more likely to get a starter if you can trade your 3rd round pick than you are to get a starter if you use a 3rd round pick.
100. That's exactly what I was going to say. You put it well.
Yeah, that's true. And so I do think in that case, maybe you say, hey, who cares about this pick? And you do that. But you gotta trade for him. Free agency wise, do you like players who would have been excellent pickups in 2018? Because that's pretty much what's available at defensive end.
Yeah, it's I haven't refreshed the list this morning. NFL.com has a good kind of rolling list on like the best players who are still available. I think they had last time I checked, I think Joey Bosa was the best available defensive end who's still out there. I think he's
great guy to get it. 2018.
Yes, exactly.
2018, fantastic.
Yeah, he's 31. I think he's got the body of a 35 or 36-year-old. He's the type of guy that if you kind of had the need for a secondary or a spot edge rusher, I think would have been a great fit. Like if you already had that number one guy, let's say you didn't have Latu, maybe you had some of these other players like JTT or Arden Key, and you wanted to add some more juice into the mix on someone who's maybe not going to play a ton of snaps, but could, if you found the right spots in game situations, could give you something. He's the guy that makes sense. He's not a guy who can go and start for you next year at defensive end. I just don't think that works. And then, when I go down the list, AJ Epinesa, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, don't know a whole lot about him, but he's the second best available edge rusher out there, according to NFL.com. Hassan Reddick, Cameron Jordan, who's 37 years old, a guy I know that you have a lot of familiarity with. Again, a guy that would have been great in 2018. I think you put that well. That seems very fitting there.
The Epinesa is 27. He's the one outlier here. The thing with Epinesa, and I will admit I have not watched him enough to know for sure, but if I look at his profile and kind of what the Bills writers have said about him and what his stats are, it feels like he feels very quitty. Feels very quitty pay. Like that doesn't strike me as he's hovered around 10 quarterback hits a year. He had 3 6-sack seasons, but they're not like these aren't like dominant pass rush seasons. These are, he's a guy who can play the run. He can get you the occasional sack. Like if you have other guys, that's not what they need. They need a guy who can force the pass rush. So,
they have a lot of players who can mop up if you have a strong force on the other side. That's kind of what they're missing.
Now that with what's left, like Epinesa might be what's left at some point. But I just don't. I don't think that he gives you anything that you wouldn't have gotten from re-signing Quiddy Pay, except maybe more cap space.
Could we get Cam Jordan just for like from the media standpoint?
Well, Cam has a podcast every week.
There we go. He just fills the Zaire Franklin role on the podcast. He gives us some great quotes. And maybe that is the peak of what
I will say this. When I covered Cam in New Orleans, watching him rush was really, really fun because he's a power rusher and he does some stuff that like he was a really, really great power rusher. He used Reggie White's hump move once, which is like my favorite move in the history of football. And it's really, really hard to do, and only like one person can do it. I also saw him live. He sacked Matthew Stafford with his right tackle. It's one of my favorite sacks ever. He took the lineman and literally threw him into Matthew Stafford and then tapped his cleat while Stafford was lying on the ground underneath the Lions' right tackle. Incredible. But Cam's 37. The man's 37. He's not coming down off the edge the same way he used to.
No. So that's kind of where they stand there. Again, a big hole there. Let's take a quick run through again. The players that the Colts have either let walk or have traded away in free agency. As things stand, again, this is we are at 10:17 a.m. on Friday. So things certainly could change before we get this podcast to you guys or before you start listening to it. Players, free agents who the Colts have let walk away: Quiddy Pay, obviously your starter at defensive end; Braden Smith, longtime starter on the offensive line, going to Houston; Nick Cross, your starting safety; Neville Gallimore, some rotation in your defensive line; Rodney Thomas at safety; and Samson Ebukam, of course, another rotational edge rusher there. And then the Colts also traded away Zaire Franklin. They traded away Michael Pittman Jr., who we haven't talked about yet. They have gotten Colby Wooden. They have gained a 6th round comp pick from the Steelers, pick number 214. We were finally able to confirm that yesterday. And then they've re-signed Alec Pierce, Daniel Jones, Blake Grupe. They've signed Arden Key, Michael Clemens, Derek Noddy, And that is the Colts free agency picture through nearly 3 days of true open market there. So maybe before we finish up here, a couple guys on the offense, some notable starters that the Colts will not have next year: Michael Pittman Jr., Braden Smith, two guys that I think really had been some foundational pieces for this team over the last couple of years. Michael Pittman Jr. was the team's number one receiver, I think, pretty solidly from 2021 to 2024. Braden Smith, a longtime starter there on the offensive line. What do you make of those two longtime Colts ending up playing elsewhere in 2026?
Yeah, Braden, if you listen to what they've said about Jalen Travis towards the end of the season, and then right away, you could kind of feel that coming, that they were going to make a move at right tackle, have a young guy at right tackle. It kind of stinks from just a standpoint of, Braden Smith has been here a long time. Obviously, I think most people know, he had the OCD battle. He had the battle with OCD that he came through, and really kind of inspiring, I think, if you were around him all last season, like I was, to see just a very different Braden. He always was very quiet before, very open and willing to talk and willing to be an advocate for mental health for players. But the Colts have done this with offensive linemen. They did it with Ryan Kelly. As guys get up there in age, they don't generally try to find a replacement for him. They did it with Jalen Travis. They like him. So I wasn't necessarily surprised by that move. Although I do know that they told Braden Smith that they would like him back if they could get him. But basically, they were in a holding pattern with Trey Hendrickson. They were in a holding pattern with Jones at that point. And Braden Smith had to make a decision. They felt like they had to make decisions. They picked Houston. He went to Houston. He's going to be in Houston. It does open a spot. I will say that. It does open a spot. I think Jalen Travis obviously slides into that starting tackle spot, but who's your swing tackle? You gotta find a swing tackle now. And right now, the way it looks is that there's a ton of holes on defense that you might want to use draft picks on. So finding a swing tackle in the fourth round, they've shown they can do that. In the third or fourth round, they've shown they can do that the last couple of years. Fifth or sixth might be tougher. So that spot, and then the other one is wide receiver with Michael Pittman Jr. being traded. I think one of the things that maybe surprised me is what they had to trade him for. This is a pick swap. It's just a salary dump, and you can look at that a couple of ways. Like, you can look at that as, I can't believe Ballard just gave him up for nothing. But I think generally the way I look at trades in the NFL, especially in the offseason, is that's what the league was willing to give for him. Like the Steelers extended him right away and gave him a 3-year, $59 million deal. That's not very much in the current market. I mean, it feels like it's a lot, but it's really not. It's just interesting to see how far, because the league, DJ Moore had a really high profile rough season last year, and the Bills were willing to send their second round pick to the Bears for him. And they got a fifth rounder back, but and he also had a big money contract. The fact that it was just a pick swap suggests that the rest of the league was kind of like, yeah, we might take him, but you have to sweeten the pot a little bit, or it's interesting. I do think he's fallen off some the last couple of years. And his lack of speed gets attention, but he's kind of always had that. The thing that sticks out to me is just that if you're going to be the possession guy, and make the tough catches, you got to make the tough catches. And I think Pittman, you can speak to this here in a second because you were there in Houston. But I think Pittman would agree with this. There were too many catches this year like that he didn't come up with. And he's got to, if he's going to be valuable on a roster, he has to come up with all of them, because he can't do what Pierce can do and stretch teams deep.
Yeah, there were two in the season finale game in Houston that he dropped. There's another in that Colts home game at Lucas Oil against Houston that he dropped, and there may have been one or two more that are slipping my mind immediately just from this season. He told us in that locker room immediately following that season finale loss that his performance both in that game and in the season at large just wasn't good enough. It wasn't cutting it. And he, I really, I applaud him for his honesty. I know I was only able to cover him for half a season. You've been with him his entire career, but it really struck me in that moment in the locker room that he proactively said that he knew there could be a chance he might not be back next year. He knew that he was obviously not a free agent, but said, "Look, I know how much money I'm making, what my cap hit is." He didn't say that exactly, but that was kind of the implication that he knew the responsibilities of someone who was set to charge the Colts $29 million in cap space this upcoming season. And he recognized that he did not live up to those expectations in some key moments in 2025, and realized that that could have been the last game that he played as a Colt, and said that, if it is, I understand. I will always be a Colt, and I appreciate the opportunity that I've had to play here. But we as a team did not get it done down the stretch, but I personally did not get it done as well. I mean, he still caught, I think, 80 balls, was somewhere around 800 yards, if memory serves me right. Still like a solid member of a wide receiver room, probably no longer a true number one. And that's okay, because Alec Pierce is coming back and has been portrayed as being that number one guy, but it didn't feel like it felt like if he was going to stay here, they needed to work something out where, he was certainly going to be, less money this year from a cap standpoint, and figure out a contract that made sense. I don't know if the Colts would have been okay in that 3-year, $59 million range, or how that could have worked out in their minds, but they clear $24 million in cap space and are able to give him an opportunity where he might be able to play a little bit bigger role in Pittsburgh. We don't know yet what their quarterback position is going to be like, if Aaron Rodgers is returning there or not. So maybe seems like a place where he could do a little bit more than an organization that is like fully now behind Alec Pierce as their number one guy, someone who expects to get well over 100 targets next year, and even more than the 1,003 yards and the 6 touchdowns that he caught this year. Seemed like it was notable, even though Pittman, was down on his catches and down on his yards this year. He still got a career high 7 touchdowns. I do think 6 of those came in the first 10 games of the year. I think he only caught 1 over the final 7 games. He was a guy that, down the stretch, when you look at his production versus versus Alec Pierce, either when Daniel Jones was hurt or when they were leaning on Phillip Rivers or Riley Leonard in the season finale, Alec Pierce's numbers didn't really drop off too much from a production standpoint. And Pittman's fell way, way down. I think he only had somewhere around 200 yards over those final 7 games. Obviously only had 1 touchdown. He was a guy that, for whatever reason, felt like he kind of, I don't know that he was necessarily forgotten, but just did not factor into things in a way that he had when that offense was really rolling, when Daniel Jones was really healthy, and clearly the Colts felt like it was time to move on. Maybe one last question for you before we go here. They have Alec Pierce, they have Tyler Warren, they have Josh Downs. Does it still feel like they need to go and either draft someone? And again, that seems like that could be tough when we have already spoken about a lot of holes on defense alone that they need to fill in the draft. Do they need to go and draft someone maybe with a 3rd round pick or a 4th round pick that could be a starter for you at wide receiver, or sign one of the lower guys still left in free agency? Or do you feel like they can roll into things next year with Josh Downs and Alec Pierce and Tyler Warren just carrying a little bit heavier loads left in the absence of Michael Pittman Jr.?
So Okay, you cleared some cap space, presumably for Trey Hendrickson. You've got some. Hear me out here, and I don't know. I don't have the breakdown. I think there's maybe an opportunity here. I don't know for sure. This is the hard part is trying to figure out some of the evaluation of opposing players, free agents, and stuff like that. But Juwan Jennings is available. And we've made it to Friday. He has not signed yet. That means his market isn't what he thinks it is. Isn't what he thinks it was going to be. If Pittman is 3 years, $59 million, Jennings would have to come in south of that, I would assume. Is there an opportunity to get a Pittman replacement? And my understanding of Jennings is that's what he kind of is. He's a big, tough guy. He's going to make the possession catches. You can scheme him up. He's going to block, like kind of Pittman-esque, like a little bit lesser of a player, but kind of Pittman-esque. Maybe you make a value signing here and take advantage of a market that doesn't seem like it's developing the way he wants. And then that frees you up to do stuff elsewhere on defense.
That could make some sense. Just the idea of having to use, again, we talked about, do they send that 3rd round pick to Minnesota for Jonathan Grenard? If you do that, then you probably need to use that 2nd round pick on a linebacker, and then all of a sudden you're getting to the 4th round. The Colts have clearly had a lot of success in drafting wide receivers outside the 1st round. That's where they got Alec Pierce. That's where they got Michael Pittman Jr., both in the 2nd round, a couple of years apart. But going down to the 4th round, when you're picking outside the top 120, 130 picks, I feel like that starts to get a little bit more difficult to get a guy that and again, it wouldn't have to be someone that would have to have a major impact this year, but you're trying to draft someone that you feel like you can get some value out of down the road, who you can build up over the next couple years. And is it worth it to you to use that pick there when you could maybe take, fill a depth hole on the defense or draft an offensive lineman to build up some of your holes there? That'd be something that the Colts would have to decide on. And that's where maybe I don't know that I would call Juwan Jennings like a splash in free agency, but that would be someone who I would feel like could make a notable impact on them next year, and who is obviously still available and kind of shows like, yes, I know things have slowed down here in free agency. We're again taping on Friday morning, but there are still opportunities to find guys who can make an impact for you, and who can fill holes on your team and potentially get some starts and play a lot of snaps, even though they weren't taken in the 1st or 2nd day. Guys could agree to terms on Monday at noon, and even someone like Trey Hendrickson didn't get swooped up until nearly 2 days later. So like if someone like him is taking 2 days to figure things out, then it would make sense that there are still some solid players on the market 4 days into things who are still waiting to be gotten out there. I think that probably does it.
The linebackers left either, man.
No, I know.
Sorry, I'm looking. I've kind of spent part of the podcast looking through who's left, and I'm like, man, if the goal is to get younger and faster, I don't know what you do there.
Yeah, it's tough. Well, look forward to getting some sense of what the last couple of days were like behind the scenes when you get a chance to talk to Chris Ballard next at the owners' meetings. That will be, as revealing as he's able to be or willing to be. I think that'll tell us a lot about what really happened the last couple of days, and maybe answer the question on why they didn't or why they couldn't have a better contingency plan there. I know that we were talking yesterday about someone like Bradley Chubb, who felt like he could have, certainly wasn't going to make as big of an impact as Trey Hendrickson at that starting edge rusher spot, but still would have been someone who it felt like when Hendrickson went off the board, someone like Chubb felt like he was maybe the best guy available. And then I think he still goes to the Bills.
That deal also felt really, really, really like it and it should, because that deal felt really, really like kind of easy, but Oh, interesting.
What now?
I didn't realize that $4 million of Jonathan Grenard's 2026 salary becomes fully guaranteed today.
Okay.
I don't know what that means. Because that means it's already guaranteed. Well, we're talking about it.
So would that mean guaranteed as in it would have to be on the books for the Vikings, or be guaranteed against whoever would be trading for it?
My assumption is that it would be the Colts, unless it's
Okay.
like a bonus.
Yeah, that's true.
Because the signing bonus has already been paid. Let me look up his contract real fast. I can do this fairly quickly. I can't. His base for 2026. If you acquire Jonathan Grenard, regardless of what the guarantees are, it looks like it'd be around $18.5 million for the next 2 years. But I know he wants a new deal. That might be the sticking point there. He wants a new deal. I'm not convinced I would give it to him.
Yeah, because he missed a good chunk of last season, if memory serves me correctly.
Then again, we're right back to where we started the podcast. They really need a defensive end who can rush the passer.
Yeah, like it almost gets more and more urgent, and you almost kind of like whatever risk you might have been taking in not taking Trey Hendrickson, given the risk that was around him. Like the last thing you want to do is then be cautious and not sign him, and then sign someone else who, given what his production was and the fact that he's a little bit lower level guy, you find yourself taking an even bigger risk. Like outside of 2025, he's coming off of 2 seasons where he had 12 and a half sacks in 2023 with Houston in 15 games, and then 12 sacks in 2024 with Minnesota, where he was a Pro Bowler, but then finished just with 3 sacks last year. He only started 10 games, played in 12 of them, dealing with some injury issues there. When a guy that still has 2 years left on his deal, as you mentioned, that would be tough to give him a new contract. I certainly would think that would be, feels like you would maybe want to wait a year, make sure that he's back fully healthy when you're already paying him upwards of $20 million and trading away some pretty valuable draft capital in order to secure him too. So we'll see on the next edition of the Colts Cover 2 podcast if we have some news to speak about there at that gaping hole at defensive end, see what the Colts maybe do at linebacker over the next few days. If there's some news on the wide receiver front, as we spoke about here. I'm sure there will be more things to talk about. This team will look different, I have to think, in a week from now compared to what it is now. But lots of questions still looming about what the Colts will do as free agency kind of winds down to a little bit of a trickle instead of just the gushing of news that was taking place Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and even to some extent on the early part of Thursday. We will have all of that and more for you on the next edition of the Colts Cover 2 podcast. Between now and then, please go to IndyStar.com, where both of us have stories up on talking to Daniel Jones yesterday, on talking to Alec Pierce on Wednesday. We'll have more stories to come on some of these new players that the Colts have signed, as well as some analysis on how all of these pieces fit together, like we have kind of broken down a little bit here. Please like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you choose, and of course go to our Indy Star Colts YouTube page, where we will have clips of this podcast, the full podcast, and some breaking news videos as news continues to trickle in for the Colts around free agency. We appreciate you guys listening, tuning in, and come to us next time, as we will, I'm sure, have some big things to discuss and see how this Colts roster continues to take shape this offseason. Thanks for tuning in.